My experience with the clergy has been mixed when it came to my interfaith marriage. As a young adult, I was a model Christian. I would go for daily mass, I went for the weekly novena, I took part in all parish activities. I was on the liturgical committee. We would meet every week to prepare the liturgy for the Sunday Eucharist. And I was even studying theology. So you could see I was a very favored daughter of the church. I was invited for all the archdiocesan functions. And then I decided to marry a Hindu. And that's when things started changing. It was a shock for many. Some of the senior priests who I knew, in fact, cautioned me and said that I was making a mistake and told me that, many of these marriages break down, they don't last. I realized that they said this out of concern, okay, and I appreciate that. But at the time when it happened, it was very unsettling. However, I was also fortunate to have a parish priest, Monsignor Anthony Cordero, who was a very warm and understanding person who welcomed Kalpesh. And in fact, he and Father Ralph Fernandez, who was also part of the parish team at that time, they helped me with a lot, with a lot of the formalities, and also I would say were bridge builders, peacemakers, where my mother was concerned. My mother's a widow, and she, being a conservative Catholic, had a very difficult time reconciling to the fact that I was getting married to a Hindu. My first hurdle with the institutional church came when I was told that I had to make a promise to baptize my children. My husband Kalpesh and I had discussed this quite in detail and at length, because I was aware of that there was something like this. And to be quite honest, he felt that if we baptized our children, they would get a label, and as Catholics, they would not be able to participate in his religious tradition. And I thought that made a lot of sense. I thought that, he felt that this would alienate his children from him. And I definitely felt that I didn't want to be part of this. And I also thought that if we baptized the children, it could also jeopardize the trust that we had in the family, and might even be a problem for me to practice my faith, because it might cause a kind of resentment, and it would be difficult for me to bring the children up in the Catholic faith. And so we had decided as a couple that since there were two religious traditions in the family, the children would be exposed to both, and when they were old enough, they could decide what particular path they wanted to choose in terms of communing with God. The irony is that while I was asked to make this promise, in actual fact the church rules have changed, and this promise now is no longer mandatory. So I got married in 1988, and 5 years prior to that the Code of Canon Law had changed. And while the 1917 Code of Canon Law insisted on the baptism of children in interfaith marriages, the 1983 Code of Canon Law had introduced a new clause, and it said that the partner in an interfaith marriage has to make a sincere promise to do all in his or her power in order that all the children be baptized and brought up in the Catholic faith. Now, this clause, in order to do all in his or her power, made a huge difference, because according to me, that recognized the fact, always up to the individual to make this choice to baptize children, and that there are many other factors that come into play. I like actually what the CBCI guidelines for interreligious dialogue states. It says that this promise must be done in a spirit of harmony and love rather than law, always remembering that keeping peace and trust in the family is the most fundamental duty in every marriage. Unfortunately, the bishops of the Bombay Archdiocese thought otherwise, and I was later told that although this law existed, the 1983 law existed, the bishops had taken a decision to, stick to the clause of the 1917 code because they wanted to discourage interfaith marriages. And I myself would never have known about this were it not for the fact that I had a very good Jesuit counselor, Father Jaime Fabregat, and he was the one who explained the law to me and made me aware of my rights. And as a result of that, I refused to sign the paper that was given to me, and I told my I told my parish priest that, look, I'm willing to sign the clause that is there in the new code. So I typed out my own, the promise, and I signed that and submitted it to him. And of course, he accepted it without any sort of protest. So that was one good thing that happened. I must say I had a very beautiful and meaningful wedding ceremony, very inclusive. At that time, they didn't have the strict liturgical rules that they have today. So I had, I was able to use, we used dual languages. I was able to use a passage from Khalil Gibran and hymns from Rabindranath Tagore, of course, which we sing in church. And this was part of the nuptial service, and during the Mass, I actually used a verse from the Bhagavad Gita as part of my penitential prayer. Even the symbols that we used were, Indian symbols, kumkum, oil, the flowers, the coconut, the diya, all of this with the lighting of the diya, all of this was there because I wanted to emphasize the points of unity of the worshipping communities, because I had a lot of Hindus. Kalpish's entire family came for the Mass. For me, I wanted everyone to be part of it. I didn't want them to be just spectators. And we had 13 priests celebrating at the Mass, and I often joke and I tell Kalpish that, well, our marriage has survived maybe because of the blessings of all those priests that day. So after the wedding, everything was fine for a while. I continued participating in church activities, etc. And then in 1996, Cardinal Simon Pimenta retired and Bishop Ivan Dias was appointed in his place. I was from the same parish where the Archbishop's house is, but we had never really met. My trouble started when I wrote an article in the Examiner called "The Feminine Face of God." Promptly the next week, there was an article from the Cardinal which was titled "In the Name of the Father and of the Son." And I was told that this was fine. I mean, it's okay. He has his views, I have mine. But I was told that he then made it a point to find out who I was. Who was this person who had written this article? And needless to say, he also came to know that I had married a Hindu, that my children were not baptized. And suddenly I became a counter witness in the church. I was ostracized. He literally started telling people that they could not invite me. I was not allowed to write in the Examiner. I was no longer, permitted to. I used to give courses in the seminary on feminist theology. That was stopped. In the parish, I was kind of marginalized. Okay, I used to be so active as a lector and in various other things. I was barred from that. He went so far as to tell the chairman bishop of, I was a member of the CBCI Commission for Women. I've been there right since the beginning when Bishop Bosco was there. And Cardinal Ivan Dias told that chairperson, there was a bishop from Pune, that you shouldn't be having a woman like this on your team. I mean, what kind of a witness is she giving with her unbaptized children? And to the credit of that bishop, I must say that he told me about this, and he said, well, I have no problems with you staying on. And I continued to work with that commission. But at home, the ban was upheld by the bishops, men who I had worked closely with for decades, men whom I considered friends. And when I confronted one of them, he said to me, well, as bishops, we take a vow of obedience, and so we have no choice. And of course, he tried to console me, and he said that, well, you know, prophets are always have to face persecution, so this is something that you have to take in your stride. And for me, it was a shock to see how the ranks closed and how easy it was to marginalize somebody who had given so much to the church. I had given my time, my energy, my expertise. I was always available. And suddenly, just because you know, one person said that this one is unacceptable, I was just thrown out. I cannot tell you how terrible I felt. I felt actually betrayed, because for me the church was literally the mother church, and I felt betrayed, and I wept. And my Hindu husband saw my pain and anger, and for me, I always feel, maybe, see, it would have been bad, I think, for anybody for this experience to happen. But when you are in an interfaith marriage, you are also a face of the church. And when this was happening, I kept thinking, what is my husband thinking about the church? You know, there I had fought so hard for my children to belong to the church. They used to go for Sunday, not baptized, but they were in Catholic schools. They used to attend. I had taken special permission for them to attend catechism classes, so all of them were attending catechism. In fact, my second daughter, 3 years running, got the prize in the catechism class. So they used to go for Sunday school. I used to send them. I myself as a child never went for Sunday school, but my children have all gone for Sunday school. And then I'm thinking to myself, this is the church that is just marginalizing me. And then I started thinking that, okay, if this is the way it is, then maybe I should just take a back seat. But then I began thinking to myself also that, yes, that is a solution. That is one way of looking at it, you know, just be a nominal Christian. But I thought to myself, if that was if I did that, would this kind of attitude be enough to face the challenges of holding together an interfaith family? And then, of course, the larger question remained, how would I bring my children up to love a church in which I myself felt marginalized? There was also the whole question of dialogue within my marriage. This was, in a way, this was an overt pressure on me to baptize my children, so that, you know, only if I baptize my children would I then be a full-fledged member of the church. And I felt that this posed a threat to the union of my husband and I. What could I say to him? You know, he always would talk about conversions, and yes, all the church is worried about is numbers, and I would defend that and say, of course not. And then I thought to myself, if something like this happens, then what do I say to him? That he was right after all, and the bottom line is ultimately only numbers? He was quite upset actually when he saw this happening to me, and he said, you know, I don't want my children to be manipulated and stifled in the church like you are. I want them to grow up in religious freedom. And really, I felt at a loss at that time, because he had seen the pain and anger that, you know, I had been through just because the cardinal didn't like me. So at the end of it all, I decided that I would walk out of the church, because obviously it was something that was troubling me a lot. Before taking that step, I decided that I would consult some of my priest friends, and one of them was Samuel Ryan, the senior theologian. I knew him because I was a member of the Indian Theological Association, and he turned around and he said to me, he said, why should you leave? He says, you are the church. And you know, that made a lot of sense to me. And I also spoke to my Jesuit cousin, but then he was a bishop, and he pointed out to me that the church is not only large enough for you and your archbishop, but it needs the diversity that each of you brings. The dynamic tension is an important aspect of growth, and that also made sense to me, because I've seen that you know, that when there is struggle, you have really accelerated spurts of growth, and so that really made sense. I also found support in a lot of my priest friends. I could see, for instance, Tony Charangat, the editor of the Examiner, even though he knew that the cardinal didn't like it, he would, you know, occasionally publish some of my articles. Father Alvin, that time he was not yet bishop, Alvin de Silva and John de Mello, who were professors in the seminary. They called me to teach. Of course, there would be a lot of negotiations. So instead of teaching feminist theology, they would say, okay, you teach ecofeminism. But for me, it was, it was the support that I got that, really made the difference. Looking back now, and maybe some years after all this happened, I think that what Cardinal Ivan Diaz did really was a gift of the Spirit. The experience cut my umbilical cord with the church, and I finally became an adult. I was no longer caught up in emotional ties with the church. I could look at it very objectively. And I also found that the male hierarchy no longer had power over me. I was able to act as an independent individual. I personally feel that I have been freed from the invisible prison in which I had found myself.